All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for joining us today for our next iteration of IMAX Live. I am Leah Silver, the Sales and Membership Manager at IMAX Victoria, and joining me today is our fabulous guest, Daniel Ferguson. Thank you for joining us, Daniel. Hello. We
Hello, Victoria. Hello, Leah.
Woo! We are so happy to have you here with us today, Daniel. For context, everyone, I'm sure that most people know your work, but might not know you're the man behind it. So just a bit of context for everyone on what work you would have seen on our screen from Daniel Ferguson. Most recently, we featured, there you go, Superpower Dogs. Absolutely. So this time last year, we opened Superpower Dogs. It did run through last summer. We know Victoria loves Superpower Dogs. I personally loved it. One of my favorites. Other work, Journey to Mecca, Jerusalem, which played just there we go. Perfect. Jerusalem played in our film festival this year. So some folks will have seen that just this past February. You've worked on titles that are outside of the giant screen world as well. Wired to Win, Elephant Man. So thank you so much for joining us today. Daniel is a Canadian streaming from us live from Quebec. So thank you, and welcome, Daniel.
It's great to be here. It's great to be anywhere.
It's true.
I must just say that, in full disclosure, that I always refer to Victoria as my second home. My parents lived there. I never had the pleasure of living there, but it is the greatest place to visit, and I'm sure to live, but I can't comment on that. And I love opening films. You guys really know how to do it. So my hat is off to you and Paul and Marie and the whole team. You guys really have, you treat the giant screen as the jewel that it is. It's a really special thing, and I think your members and your community really appreciates that. So it's just a real pleasure to open a film or to go back there at any moment and see what you guys are up to.
Well, thank you. I will take that compliment. Thank you very much. Daniel did join us for folks whose memories might be jogged. Daniel did join us for the opening of Superpower Dogs, where we had Henry and Ian Bunbury, his human partner, as well as you helped us open Jerusalem back when we originally played that too. So yes, we're always happy to have you here in Victoria, and today to join us in Victoria virtually. It's an absolute pleasure. So what I have today, folks, is some of our pass holders, our annual members, have submitted questions to us in advance. And I'm excited for this. I think we're going to get a really eclectic look at your work, Daniel, and some of your experience in giant screen filmmaking. So to start off, I just wanted to ask sort of what brought you to documentary? Why did you get into documentary filmmaking?
There's really no reason apart from the fact that we in Canada have this incredibly rich tradition of making documentaries, and I kind of fell into it somewhat by accident. I've always loved documentaries. I started off producing and line producing feature films, narrative films, and I met someone who was involved in financing IMAX movies and producing IMAX movies, and I love the format. I think my first IMAX experience was probably a double bill of, I think there was definitely Beavers and Grand Canyon or something. And I still remember that experience. And I used to live in Toronto, and they, of course, had the Ontario Place.
Right.
We go there. I loved, the 70 millimeters of format. Then I lived in Perth, Australia. I went to the Omni. So it was always important to me, and I thought it was thrilling. And so it was a kind of a dream for me, a dream come true to make the transition to IMAX and to giant screen stuff. But as far as documentaries, no, I think it's just a matter of if you want to tell a story, it could be fiction, it could be nonfiction. For me, it's either way. I love both, and it's just something that with any career, when you show some kind of devotion, some strength towards that, and people say, "Oh, that's what you do. You're the documentary guy, or
Right.
you're the narrative guy, or this is what you do. This is your style." And people love to kind of pigeonhole, and I sort of resist that a little bit.
Yeah.
I love to apply some of the language of fiction films to documentaries and vice versa. And I like to try to change everything that I do. As you could tell, the work that I've done has been pretty eclectic.
Mm-hmm.
And I just love to keep challenging it. So I love documentaries. I watch a ton of documentaries. I love making documentaries. I have to say that I don't want to be definitive, but I think sometimes making a documentary is actually way more fun than making a fiction. Writing is great. It's but the physical production sometimes is so grueling.
Right.
And the great thing about a documentary is you're making connections largely for life. You're meeting subjects. You're traveling to these incredible places, and they become transformative in just the making of them. So they're a huge pleasure to work on when you can really sink your teeth into a subject that you adore.
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. And what changed for you when, because I do know that you still sometimes work not in giant screen, but how is it different to take documentary filmmaking and move that from a traditional medium to a giant screen? How does that look differently for you?
It's entirely different, and yet it isn't. And
Okay.
here, let me explain that.
Yeah.
That I think that if you're going to make a movie for the giant screen, you have to design it with the giant screen in mind. It has to deliver on the promise of that screen. And so it doesn't just mean go big. It means really think about the relationship of the audience to the screen, the fact that every shot is subjective and that your brain is tricked into believing there, and that people come for a bit of a virtual reality experience. And I'm not just referring to the wearing the headset. I mean that idea that you feel like you're falling, you're flying, or you're moving through an intimate environment. But there's that you are there feeling that the IMAX format gives you, and you want to play to its strengths. So the way you tell a story is different, but you still are a storyteller. So at its heart, it's the same thing. It's just that the language might be different. So how you compose shots, how you edit the material, how long you hold a shot, the way you move the camera, everything is very different, depending on the format. But that said, I think that your duty is to the format itself, but also to the subject. And sort of as a director, you're always trying to find what are the most appropriate tools. What's the language that I'm going to use to tell the story so that it really connects with an audience? And part of that is knowing your audience. Obviously, in the case of Superpower Dogs, it's a film that skews a little bit younger. I really wanted to make this for my kids, but for kids everywhere. And this came out of making Jerusalem, which I would say at about 8, 9, 10, that was okay, but younger kids struggled. Obviously, it's a weighty subject matter, and not a lot of cuddly animals, for example.
Yeah.
And so I knew that going in, that film was going to skew a little bit older, and I'm referring to Jerusalem, of course. Yeah. And I think that Superpower Dogs was sort of a reaction to that. So every film, for me at least, is a reaction to ones that I may not have made, and I think it's a fear of just falling into a rut creatively where you're just making the same thing again and again. Every film should be a challenge. And there's no reason to say that I couldn't make a film about any particular subject if I were really passionate about it. Then why not? And that's my message to filmmakers as well, is make sure that you continue to challenge yourselves no matter what it is.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's one of the great things about documentary is that the world of reality is huge, right? There's no limit of the things that can be talked about. So you can say, oh, okay, I've done as you did. Okay, I've done a film that skews older, a film that is sort of culture, spirituality related. I'm going to do one about amazing animals and dogs, and just, all of that content is out there and is fabulous. So that's awesome.
It's a bit like fiction and nonfiction. I love reading both. And I would say that I probably read 2 nonfiction for every fiction book that I read. I don't know what it is, but I find it easier to just slip into a subject matter and say, I want to learn about this now, and find a great book about that subject. It's just our brains kind of consume them in very different ways. And I think that the context of coming to the Royal BC Museum or any of these museums that have giant screens, that have IMAX screens, you're sort of primed for learning. There's a curiosity that begins, and I'm not saying that you're not when you choose a film on Netflix that might be in the fiction world, or you go to a multiplex or something like that. And I know that the lines blur, but sometimes you have a hunger for something different. And I think that documentary and fiction can coexist perfectly. It's really just depending on your appetite. And hopefully people just consume the whole smorgasbord.
Exactly. Absolutely. So I have a question here from one of our pass holders. This is from Gwen. So Gwen asks you, Daniel, when did you start working on giant screen films, and have you had specific training in order to do that?
Well, thank you for your question, Gwen. And I will say that I started to work on IMAX films in 1998. I was working on a feature film. It was a co-production Canadian-Indian, and I was producing films at the time. So I was raising money and doing logistics, and just trying to figure out how to thread the needle and how to maximize the budget and all of the puzzle solving that goes into making these films. And I had creative ambitions, certainly, but I wanted to really learn about every aspect of filmmaking.
Right.
So I don't have any formal training. I didn't go to film school. I went to McGill University and I studied history and theology, but I ran the Film Society when I was there.
Okay.
And I ended up turning it into a sort of a semi-successful company where we had night school for students, and we offered courses and on-set apprenticeships. It was very practical as opposed to some of the theory that was going on at school. And I bought a lot of equipment. I met all kinds of friends and developed a community. And that's really what it's about. Is I started making short films with some friends and some of the members of the club at the time. And I was sort of bitten by the bug. And it's amazing how that very first film that you make is so definitive. And it was for me. It was hugely ambitious. We didn't have nearly enough staff or money and resources or whatever, but it was trial by fire, and I fell in love with the process. And then I made a lot of co-productions, and in 1998, I was making a film, and it was working with Bollywood actors, and I was actually bringing Bollywood actors into Montreal. And I met someone through a friend of a friend, and they said, "Hey, look, we produce IMAX movies, and we're interested in doing a movie about India." And there was that connection there. And it was a kind of a natural fit. Funnily enough, we didn't actually make that film on India. We did much later, called India Kingdom of the Tiger, and I wasn't even involved. So it shows how circuitous it was. And I ended up starting on a film about fresh water, and that was called Water Planet, and that never got made at all. So you never know. My very first IMAX film was a movie called Lost Worlds, Life in the Balance. And it was directed by Bailey Sillick and produced by Jeff Marvin and Guillaume Marcy. And I learned so much. I was the line producer. It was a tremendous opportunity for me. It was a film on biodiversity, initially to accompany the Hall of Biodiversity that opened in about 2001, I think, at the American Museum of Natural History. Harrison Ford narrated it, and Ed Wilson helped us on the script. It was based on his book, The Diversity of Life. It was amazing. We shot all over South America and all over the world, and we did underwater and in the jungle, and we did incredible stuff. But I learned so much on this. That was back in we shot it in 99, 2000. There's nothing like taking a film from inception, what was on the page, in this case, a film that had received a National Science Foundation grant, and taking it all the way through the edit, and then the packaging and the distribution and the marketing and the rollout. And along the way, the company that I was working with at the time, Primesco, they had me moving about and actually financing the films, but also meeting the theaters. Right. So I got a chance to learn what it was like to not only sell a movie, but for you guys to exhibit a movie. And there's a real chain that's so important from, say, the writer and the financiers, the people who have the idea and the passion, the belief that everyone on the planet needs to know this story. That's the essential, that's the fire in the belly that gets a movie made, hopefully. And it's totally irrational because, if you were just in it to make money, you'd be in real estate or some other market. Because filmmaking makes no sense whatsoever. You have to absolutely love it. And if you love it, then eventually that passion becomes contagious. You get the money together and you go off and you make it, and it takes many, many years. And then you finally hand it over to a distributor, or you distribute it yourself. And what's amazing about the giant screen world is these films roll out over years. Sometimes IMAX Victoria will take a film that I've made. You guys just showed Jerusalem. Yeah. We made that movie. We finished it in 2013. So you want these films to be evergreens, but you really don't anticipate that long shelf life of how you guys ultimately take these films and make them your own. You do so much of the marketing, and you build a community, in this case your members, and then I show up and I might do a Q&A or something like that, but it's really you guys are building that enthusiasm, and I love that. That was the spark for me, that I could
Yeah.
connect directly with audiences. So much more satisfying than television, because you might have an opening night, you get your ratings, and people give you
Right.
some feedback. Or theatrical, it comes out opening weekend, and then it's gone.
Right.
Whereas the IMAX format is so wonderful because it lives for years, and you can interact with families and parents and people who are genuinely really moved. And you see that, whether now we have, social media is wonderful and people are sort of responding in real time. So
Yeah.
long way of saying that's kind of how I got into it. That's why I love it. That's why I'm kind of addicted. I can't
Yeah.
keep away from
Yeah, I think that that is one of the things that is so unique to the giant screen community that a lot of our guests don't really understand is this is a really small group of people. It's a small group of theaters, it's a small group of filmmakers that all really do come together to make this industry exist. And it's so strange, really, that at a theater level, you do get to interact with that whole community, that you're interested as a filmmaker about what's happening front line at our theater, and that is making a difference in terms of the product you're creating. I don't think that that's typical in a lot of entertainment or educational environments. I think we have such a luxury of that small community that we can really make and in my case, present films that audiences really love and that everyone is really connected to. So that's awesome. That's a highlight for you. It's definitely a highlight for me working in giant screen, having that community and seeing audiences react in the way that you're describing. That's great. So our next question is from Patrice. Maybe just to back up, anyone who's just joining us, welcome. We are doing an interview at IMAX Victoria here with Daniel Ferguson, the director of Jerusalem, Journey to Mecca, and Superpower Dogs. We have some questions from our annual pass holders that we're passing along to Daniel here, the 20 question drill. So this is from Patrice. Daniel, do you think being Canadian gives you an advantage or disadvantage to working in filmmaking?
Oh, wow, what a question. I am going to have the wheels of my brain are going to turn, but I just wanted to make one correction.
Yeah.
And that is, I didn't direct Journey to Mecca.
Okay.
I worked on it, and that's where I met my business partners, producing partners, Taryn and Dominic.
Amazing.
So that was a long way. I think you guys had Greg McGilvery on this, and so I was working with McGilvery Freeman Films as a creative consultant down in Laguna Beach, and I heard about this Hodge project, and anyhow, I ended up working on it. I was the line producer, and I was one of the script editors on it.
Okay.
But I didn't direct it, and it wasn't sort of my idea. But I'll get into that a little bit later.
Okay. Thank you for the correction. I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, Bruce Nyber directed that film. So it does being Canadian sort of help me in this kind of world. Are there any advantages in this wonderful passport that we have here? Yeah, I know. I have all these visual aids. The state of my office, but gosh, look, I think yes, and I'll explain my thinking with that. Is that I don't want to be triumphalist or exceptionalist or anything, because I think there's a part of the culture, and I'll speak for English Canada, where I grew up in Ontario, and I spent some years in Australia as well. But I live in Montreal, and I went to school at McGill, obviously. So I've always come back to Canada, and although I've lived in New York and Paris and different places, I think that there's a humility and a curiosity, not that isn't universal. Everyone has it, but I think that the fact that we're a very small country, first of all, we're not sort of we live in the shadow of a massive country. As Trudeau said, when the elephant rolls over, you know about it, right? And that's the reality of being so close. So when I grew up, there was a sense of, you're a filmmaker, you're going to go to Los Angeles, that's where the Mecca of film is, and so forth. So I think as a Canadian, we're always trying to define ourselves in terms of our identity. And a lot of that identity is based, at least for an English Canadian, is based on negation. We know what we're not. We're not an American, right? Or we're not a British. We're not Australian. We're not. And we sort of try and compare what we are. And that makes us try and define ourselves even further. So we have a rich history, I think, of institutions like the National Film Board of Canada. I think in terms of our filmmaking, we, obviously the Canadian Film Center, and there's all kinds of legacy. But I think that as far as, the French Canadian scene, the Quebec scene, there's such a rich theater and film scene here that is sort of very fledgling. It's like the little engine that could. And I think that sense of determination of, okay, we can't necessarily compete with, say, Hollywood, or, obviously many Canadian filmmakers have. How can we define ourselves in another way? Through animation, through documentary, through unique storytelling. So I think a combination of clearly, the size of our country, our approach to our identity, the fact that we live in this kind of nation within a nation idea that we talk about. First Nations are very, very prominent in this country. I think that the whole tension between French and English Canada is such an interesting dynamic, and it makes things, I would argue, more interesting, more spicy. And I think that creatively, I'm not going to gloss over anything. There's real differences, but I think those differences are something we explore and we live with. And so I think the way we gravitate to subjects might be different. We're very diplomatic as well. I would say by nature, we're extremely polite. There's a whole cliche about Canadians always apologizing and everything. And I would say it helped me tremendously making Jerusalem, for one. People would be much more disarmed to learn that I was Canadian. So fewer assumptions. Okay, so all right, what does it mean? What is a Canadian? And so it's up to me to sort of fill that blank slate. People are curious about us. We have a reputation, certainly in the 90s, as being peacekeepers. This whole idea of neutrality, if such a thing could be said to exist. So, I sound like I'm proud, and I guess I am, if such a thing can be allowed for a Canadian to be proud. But I think that, we're perhaps a little less reactionary than some. I think there's a strong culture of environmentalism, of the conservation movement, certainly in the West, but throughout the country, and activism. So I think that all these cultural elements, along with the diversity, cultural and linguistics diversity, that sort of ripples throughout the culture and expresses itself in unique ways. But again, it depends on the individual, how you're raised and all these things. So it's not a catch-all, but I have certainly leaned on the Canadian identity, and I do lean on the Quebec identity quite equally. And I think they're really important in defining who I am, how I approach the world, and how the world receives me as well.
Yeah. Well, that's an awesome segue as well into talking about one of our next questions, which is specifically about some of the tension around making the film Jerusalem, and just the topic of Jerusalem, right? I think it has been for quite some time, and it remains a bit of a hot button topic. So we have a question here from one of our pass holders, Kathy, and you've sort of addressed it, but let's dig into it a bit deeper. Kathy asks, what are the challenges of directing a film on a divisive topic such as Jerusalem?
Well, I was petrified to begin with when my producing partners sort of came and said, we'd like to do a series of films. It was the idea, we're going to do a film on Buddhism at the time, and we're going to do a film on Jerusalem. And there were all these ideas. And I said, let's do Buddhism first, because I was so resistant to the idea that in the end, we couldn't find a story that really caught. And, I think that films about culture are fascinating. And the idea was that Journey to Mecca sort of led us to this, is that could we make a film that spoke more towards the intersections, the connectivity of the Abrahamic faiths. And I just didn't want to touch this thing with a 10-foot pole, So my mind went right to the divisiveness of the subject matter. As one does. And then I sort of realized that there was a way through that. It was really when I made my first trip to Jerusalem. I'd never been. And I thought I knew it, but I didn't at all. And it surprised me on every level, on very much a human level. And I realized that there was maybe a way to do this, and it would be just brand Jerusalem. So in other words, people go and they ask sort of, are you team blue or red? They're always expecting an allegiance. Where do your loyalties lie? Are you with Israel? Are you with Palestine? And I think that the ability to just go, again, perhaps as a Canadian, and just listen. And say, look, I have no agenda here. I'm just here to learn and listen and see if this might make a good giant screen movie. That's really it. And so you think, okay, what's cinematic and what's interesting to people, and how do I make this inclusive So for me, I actually I will confess something. This was not initially by design, but I was amazed that when I went to Benedict Cumberbatch with the final narration script for Jerusalem, the word Israel or Palestine do not occur at all in that movie. And I know for some people it's a problem, and I'm sorry if you feel that way, but I always felt that it was a film about Jerusalem, and Jerusalem has. I'm not going to talk about claims or anything like that, but it's changed
Mm-hmm.
hands so many times, and it's such a fluid thing that I didn't want to negate anyone's experience. And if you want to
Right.
feel that Jerusalem is the capital of this or that or whatever, is that you know, I just wanted to take that element of nationalism, if that can be said, a little bit out of it, and that's not
Mm-hmm.
denying anyone. It just means that I wanted to try and take a little bit of that sting of politics out of the subject matter
Yeah.
and just to sort of step back and say, what the heck is this place? And what does it mean to us? You in Victoria, or me in Montreal, or someone who's living in Djibouti. I mean, what does it mean to all of us in some
Mm-hmm.
way? So I always try to look for the universal, and that's how I got over that idea of getting the divisiveness out of it. Now, that's an impossible task because by virtue of the fact that it's Jerusalem, you're going to upset someone. You're going to take a stance that someone doesn't necessarily agree with. And I've certainly been accused of all kinds of things. But I will say this, that every creative decision was mine or my producing partners. And
Right.
I'm really proud of the decisions we made of that, even though many people wanted us to show the wall, fence, etc., the terrorism, this and that. And I say, look, that's another movie. That was kind of the approach that I took. Once I came up with that through line of four voices, plus Benedict, this idea of Jody Magnus, the archaeologist, as the sort of secular voice, the inquiry voice, and then each of the three young women,
Yeah.
Jewish, Christian, Muslim, just sharing their own experiences. Because what I quickly realized in Jerusalem is that there is no one Jerusalem. This idea of objective history, I'm sorry, it's very difficult with a place like that. So
Mm-hmm.
if you go with an openness and you listen, obviously in the archaeology world, you're dealing with more scientific information, and so you can
Right.
say, this claim makes sense or it doesn't, or this artifact is either this or that, or we think that it's this. But for matters of faith and conviction and oral history, a lot of that is just so personal to someone,
Yeah.
and that's the nature of spirituality. It isn't like science in that regard. So I think that there's room for both to kind of butt up against each other,
Mm-hmm.
and as they do in this movie. But I want the audience to kind of make it their own. And I think one of the things I'm most pleased about is the fact that everyone sees something different in the film, and that it has appealed to religious and secular Jews, or Catholics and Protestants, for example, or atheists, or Sunni and Shiite Muslims.
Mm-hmm.
That's I think an amazing accomplishment. It's not just mine; it's the whole team that made that film.
Yeah.
But is I think that the key to avoiding all of that pushing and pulling is to try and find a novel way forward, because there's so many great films made on the conflict, and I addressed the conflict right up, but I also assumed a lot of knowledge on the part of the audience, and I
Yeah.
think that's kind of how I approached it.
Yeah. I think the call to action is it's a standard part and a necessary part of the giant screen experience, right? I think people expect to be mobilized by a giant screen film because a lot of the time the topics are things that they're movies made as statements. And I think the call to action and the statement of Jerusalem is not what people necessarily are expecting, right? They're expecting that which camp are you in call to action, but that's not it. The call to action is a call to sort of respect and appreciate this beautiful and deeply historical place, and to appreciate the relationship that all have with it. And I think that novel approach that you and your team took to it comes through in the film. I can't believe you found it in on a topic that is as tough as that could have been, but a round of applause for me.
I think there's something else too. Roger Ebert said that cinema is an empathy box.
Mm,
This idea that you go and you sit in a darkened space. I was watching the Apu trilogy recently, and I'm sitting there with a West Bengali family for 2 hours, whatever it is, and I become one of them. And it's the same thing. Journey to Mecca showed me that for a couple of minutes, whatever it was, I could feel what it was like to make Hajj. Like
right.
I never went to the location. Only the Muslim crew members did. And so the idea of IMAX taking you to places that you could never otherwise go, what if
Mm,
IMAX could take you into the lives of others? And I think that's the
great.
key. And I think that's one of the things that cinema does so well is that you have this very empathetic response to it. And so
Hmm.
empathy kind of was the guide as far as how we made that movie.
That's great. That's awesome. I wanted to switch gears a little bit here, Daniel, to talk about superpower dogs. I know personally that the journey for you and for the Superpower Dogs crew who were in it from sort of early concept, that has been quite a journey. And I wanted to share, I'm going to make us disappear for a second, but I'm going to keep talking because I have some photos of Daniel won't be able to see these, but our audience can see these. These are photos of Daniel. That's Daniel in the center there. Way back in 2014, we think it was, on a visit to Victoria. These were taken by our theater director, Paul Wilde. When Daniel first approached him with just a really basic idea for superpower dogs. And they were walking to get a coffee, and it just so happened that same day, there was a search and rescue dog conference happening across the street from the theater at the Victoria Conference Center. And so this is Daniel at the time with 3 dogs in training to be, or I think 1 dog in training, 2 active search and rescue hounds.
It was like a hound conference or something. I don't know. There was a bunch of beagles and bloodhounds that just came down the street, something that you see every day, right?
Yeah, totally.
And I think I had gone to take a bunch of pictures of the banners of Jerusalem or something around the theater. And Paul and I, as you say, we were coming back from coffee, and I was saying to him, he said, "Well, what's your next project?" And I was saying, "Well, there's talk of maybe doing a picture on Rome or something like that, And I'm sort of, I don't want to make the same movie. I want to do something totally different. So
Right.
we're talking about maybe this was Dominic's idea, as our producing partner, saying, well, maybe a film about dogs, and saying, well, what about dogs? And I know Marie was kind of hooked right off the bat.
Right.
Her ear was just pricked right up, and
Yeah.
she's okay, you got me. What is it? Because we've all heard dog pitches before in the IMAX world. I certainly have, and I've always dismissed them. It's kind of like, oh God, another dog movie. Like, really? Is that what the world needs? But I said, no, this one's kind of be different. It's about rescue dogs who rescue people, and it's sort of it could be an action movie, and it's about the science behind how they do what they do. And Paul was sort of like, oh, tell me more. And I said, I don't know. What do you think? Is it a good idea or not? And then all of a sudden we see these dogs, these search and rescue dogs. They're walking right towards us. So the film was born right there.
Amazing.
At your theater.
Yeah. So essentially what I am
of course
saying,
they slobbered all over me, and
Yeah.
I was just in love.
what we are saying is that Victoria is responsible for superpower dogs exclusively.
As soon as we're allowed to travel again, I'm coming back for my next idea.
Perfect. That's
It's gonna
great.
walk down the street towards me.
That's awesome. So I have a question here from Mike about superpower dogs. How did you decide what dogs to feature in the film?
Good question, Mike. The casting is always this wonderful and sort of agonizing process where you've got such a narrow kind of funnel, which is 45 minutes. And so we started off with this elaborate search. And the first thing I did was I read a ton of books, and I went online and so forth. And, the key here, though, was my dog-obsessed partner, Dominic, who lives in Kenya, has been talking our ears off for years about making a dog movie, and we've always rolled our eyes until he came up with this idea of search and rescue dogs. And then he and I went out to Whistler, actually, to watch the annual certification for the Canadian Avalanche Rescue Dog Association,
Right.
CARDA. And we didn't meet Henry at the time, but we met some other amazing dogs. And then we went to California, and we went to the Search Dog Foundation, where they train dogs for urban search and rescue. And I said to Dom, this is like the real superheroes. I mean, the world's totally obsessed. We can't get enough of these Marvel and DC movies, and yet the real superheroes are these four-legged things that are walking around. And we came up with a hook, and it seemed like a bit of a gimmick, but we sort of laughed about it, and we said, no, wait a minute, there's something really to this. Is that people are fascinated by superpowers. And what kid doesn't want, what adult doesn't want to fly or climb walls like Spider-Man or something like that? It is the coolest thing, and yet I'm a bit superheroed out myself. That's just my own feeling. However, I wanted to do something that was inspired by, but also kind of a twist on that whole superhero ethos. So that's the idea. Now, which dogs were going to be in it? I knew that we needed a variety of breeds and a variety of superpowers. Right. So that was the key. And then it became, all right, who's our hero going to be? Is it going to be the avalanche rescue dog? That was a tough call. So we knew we wanted avalanche rescue because of the natural setting, and we saw this long lining demo and we were hooked. You know, a dog flying by helicopter. I mean, that's a James Bond opening. Like, that's how we got to open the movie.
Yeah.
And we ended up wanting urban search and rescue because that's what most people, I think, relate to. You know, we live in cities, and structural collapse, you know, whether it's earthquakes or dare I say, you know, terror attacks, whatever it is. This is what we all sort of relate to. We see those are very familiar images to us. We knew we wanted a puppy. We knew that was going to be our kind of hero's journey. Dom had found this amazing group in Italy of these massive, shaggy Newfoundlands who jump out of boats and save people. And that had to go in. That was just too cool. And then, of course, Dom, working in East Africa, has done a lot of work with these wildlife trackers, who are different kind of breeds, but they found a lot of success with these bloodhounds. And after seeing the bloodhounds in Victoria, I had to get them in the movie. That was just a sign from Dog. And then Ricochet, who is kind of our fifth Avenger, doggy Avenger, if you will. I found Ricochet online. I wanted sort of more of an emotional support dog, something into the more esoteric superpowers. And everything seemed to be very TV-ish. You know, dogs in hospitals or dogs in schools, and great stuff. But I wanted something a bit more. And it was, oh my gosh, a dog who surfs and works with kids with special needs and soldiers with post-traumatic stress. And so that was the nice balancing act where we could get a geographic mix, a breed, a diversity of breeds, and also kind of a different emotions through the movie as well. So I didn't speak to the individuals, but that kind of gives you an idea of how the casting went as far as the different dogs and, of course, their human partners.
Right. That's awesome. We were so lucky to, when we opened Superpower Dogs, we have both you, Ian Bunbury, and Henry come to the theater to help open it, along with 5 other search and rescue dogs who work with CARDA, which is the Canadian Avalanche Rescue Dogs Association. I got it. Who came for a meet and greet. So I just wanted to take this moment to say thank you to everyone who did come to the meet and greet that raised funds directly for CARDA as well as the Victoria Humane Society, just to support both the local dogs in need as well as the dogs in Canada working on alpine slopes, including one of those dogs was a black lab who actually works on that was Rory, who works on the Mount Washington Alpine Rescue Team. So that's right here on Vancouver Island. So it was so cool. So thank you so much to the teams that came out to that, the audience members who came out to support that. So thank you. The next question I have on Superpower Dogs is about, this is from Vanessa. Vanessa asks, did you have to do anything differently in the filmmaking process because you were working with dogs? Any special consideration sort of on set, if you will, because your subject was a dog?
Yes, Vanessa, great question. Everything was based on the dogs. So what I mean by that is that I can write the greatest script in the world. I can write Star Wars for dogs, but it doesn't mean anything if the dog doesn't want to do it. So you've got to listen to the dogs. I sort of script all of my, even if it's a documentary, almost like it's fiction, and then I improvise from that sort of template. It just helps me know what I'm after and how do I block these things out, rather than just kind of go fishing and make the movie in the edit room. So they're highly structured. In this case, we had the American Humane Association was with us through the entire show, apart from this puppy scene that we did at the very beginning, just because we didn't even know if this puppy was going to make it. It was a last minute call that we got. But that was Mars Pet Care was our sponsor, and we quickly agreed early with Mars that we were going to get the American Humane Association on. Look, it's really, really important for us as dog lovers and animal lovers to get it right. And so, I mean, this can sink a movie. I mean, look what happened to A Dog's Purpose. And having the American Humane Association, I mean, it doesn't necessarily, guarantee everything, but it creates an infrastructure whereby someone is there and they're paid to look after the dogs.
Right.
So I'll give you an example. In Whistler, we shot a scene with a bunch of puppies. And only one puppy, Buddy, made it into the movies, the one who runs up to the camera.
Right. Yeah.
And, just around sort of in the title sequence. But I had Celine, who's our production manager. She wrangled this motley crew of puppies, and some of them had no business being in the snow
Sounds
whatsoever.
like a tough job.
Things, hilarious. But we shot this, and the Chris, who was working with us from AHA at the time, he was able to tell me, hey, this dog is a little tired. It's sort of rolling itself up in a ball and it needs to go have a nap now. And I would say, oh, it's so cute. I want to do another take. I was thinking just one more. And he'd say, no, let's just wait. And so I myself, I was always very cautious, but I needed someone to be able to say, I'm reading the dog's behavior. They're showing some signs of stress. They're licking their lips a little bit. And I think we should just cool it. Now, these are not movie dogs. We're not asking them to do 27 takes. Generally, the way we work is in a rescue situation for the dogs, it's real. It's life and death. So when they hear the S word, which I think there's no dogs around, so I can say it, but search, when you hear search, man, that is for real. Or you hear vai, which in Italian, go, jump, or whatever. That dog is going, and they're going in hot. And so they're not going to say, like, take two? Well, what? Like,
right.
How are they
They're
so stupid to get lost again or to fall in the water again? So it's it's a game, but the dogs are very smart, and so they're going to get it. That's the other thing is dogs catch on so quickly. You just can't fool them. And so you have to be ready. You got to have an amazing crew that's got to get it on take one. Because that behavior, and that's the problem with shooting a 3D movie as well. So one of the things that I did in adapting the technology to the dogs was I made sure the cameras were very low to the ground, especially with the puppy stuff. So we started the camera, and the early in the movie starts very low, and then it kind of grows. It's something you don't necessarily perceive, but it gives you this feeling of not only is the puppy growing, but your knowledge of dogs is that's the whole idea. And
oh, cool.
And so I had these little kind of devices to make sure that the technology was nimble, that in the case of water or snow, or dogs who are maybe a bit skittish around a giant unwieldy camera, that I shot some of the sequences in 2D. So I really just said, dogs come first. That's the number one rule to this, is the dogs, and working closely with their human partners to just don't push them too much.
Right.
Hitchcock said actors are cattle. We did not apply that approach to this movie. The talent was everything to us, everything. And so if the dogs were not in a good mood, we did not do it.
Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting. That is a set that I would want to be on. Yeah, that's great. Just as a total self plug as well. My dog ended up in the credits of Super Power Dogs, which was like very exciting. Little photo of her. I think I jumped into the theater at least 24 times at the end of Super Power Dogs just to see that pop up.
Listen, I tried to make that the most compelling end credits ever in a Chinese movie. So again, not to be exceptional, but it always bugs me when I get it. When Celine Dion starts singing and the lights go on, you're done. You leave your popcorn on the floor. That's the sort of multiplex mentality. But our credits are 60 to 90 seconds. They're really short. Yeah. We ripped our guts out to make this movie. We spent 4 or 5 years. Maybe just please, my plug is to just stay seated and watch the credits. We'll give you little tidbits here, and I don't know. People are saying behind the scenes, and we had great stuff that didn't make the movie hilarious, but I wanted this idea of those of you who haven't seen the movie, we've got dogs popping up. There's even maybe a cat who appears. So the whole idea was just to have the audience sit, settle, and sigh, and just digest what they've they've watched, and we even put Chris Evans in the end.
Yeah.
Goodness, I wanted to kind of take a page out of the Marvel book as well and have
Right.
multiple endings.
There you
But
go.
all
Awesome.
that so you could see your dog. Leah.
Well, the call to action is clear, Victoria. Please watch the credits. If you get anything out of this live stream, it is that you need to watch the credits. Okay, so the last question I have for you, Daniel, just to wrap up, is from Nitlin, again, one of our annual pass holders. And this is just sort of a nice thought to end on, is for anyone out there who's interested in working in the filmmaking or documentary world. Nitlin wants to know, what would it take to enter a career as a documentary filmmaker? What advice would you give?
The short advice is make a movie. That's the real short advice. And to elaborate on this very quickly, there's no one path. For some people, film school is fantastic and they meet their peer group and they end up transitioning brilliantly. I didn't do that. I ran a film co-op out of university. I kind of learned on my own. But the key, whether you're in film school or you're doing it on your own or something, is make a movie, but obviously watch tons of films. Watch films that you like. Analyze them. Watch them without the sound on. Now, that's nothing against sound people, because I love sound, but there's something about once you've seen a movie many, many times and you like it a lot, try and you can have your own sort of film school happening where you can dissect a scene and figure out what's working about it in the way that it's composed, shot, framed, all these things, but also edited. And then as you go out and you make a film, and I mean, the technology's never been easier to use. The digital technology is so much better than when I was making films. We're making films on 60 millimeter, 8 millimeter, and I think I gave every penny I had to Kodak. I did.
Right.
I spent everything I had on film stock, and I'm a bit resentful, but I did what I had to do, and I made fewer films because of it. But now with these very, very affordable digital tools, I'd say find a subject, short movie, fiction, documentary, whatever it is, and just start making the film and start making mistakes. It's really, really important also to make mistakes because that's how you learn in anything. So I think that's really is just watch the movies you love again and again and again, watch a ton of movies, make movies, modest movies, challenge yourself, make different things. But I guess maybe above all is keep in mind that it's a collaborative pursuit. So figure out who do you want to work with. You're in it for the long haul. Avoid all these politics and problems. We all love a good gossipy yarn of how this director and this producer are no longer speaking to each other. But really, that's not what it's about. What you want to do is you want to find collaborators, composers. The music is so important. We didn't get a chance to talk about this, but it's such a big part of what you're making that choose your collaborators really, really carefully. And they will make, the story that you have inside you that much more powerful. And that's the best thing about making a film is that every collaborator who joins you, and I'm speaking to you saying you're going to be the sort of the ringmaster or the sort of motivator or in chief or whatever, or director or producer or whatever it is, but try different jobs as well. I worked as an assistant camera. I worked as a boom operator. I produced most of the films, and I didn't have much of an idea what I was doing, but I learned along the way.
Right.
And every film was this like a thesis project where I was transformed by the process, and I was hungry to learn. So there's no one way. I hope that's helpful advice to some, but it's pretty intoxicating, and you'll know right away if you hate the process. Do something else.
Not for you.
But you'll love it.
Awesome. Well, thank you for those words of wisdom. Thank you for your time today, Daniel. We really appreciate it, both at the theater and our audience. The extra behind the scenes entertainment is fabulous. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you to everyone who joined us today for the YouTube Live. It's been great having you. We look forward to our next stream. And I can hear it. I can hear the round of applause out there for you, Daniel, right now. So thanks very much.
Look forward to coming back to Victoria.
Sounds good. Soon. We will see you soon. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
My best to the team. Bye-bye.